right, well, welcome to the latest installment of the R2C weekly office hours. This week we have Lewis as our guest presenter, who will be talking about reducing false positives with taint mode, and we're going to be using a real world and some real world React native code bases. So I'm Emily Fortuna. I'm a developer advocate at R2C, and I briefly mentioned Lewis. Lewis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Lewis Arden, one of the staff security researchers at Semgrep or R2C. Primarily been focusing on the JavaScript ecosystem and improving that space right now, but obviously have a lot of experience in various different languages. So if anyone has any questions during today's session, feel free to ask. Spend a lot of time trying to reduce false positives, which we're going to talk about today.
And Ty, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ty Facey. I'm a customer success engineer at R2C. So if you ever ran into any bugs or had any questions in our Slack channel, I probably interacted with you at some point in time. And I'm happy to be back co-hosting our office hours.
Awesome. Well, I'll hand it over to Lewis.
Awesome. So I'm going to take us on a little bit of a journey today. And just first, let's move people's faces out the way and everything else. So let's just take a look at an example right now. So this is kind of what currently exists in the Semgrep registry, which obviously won't exist for too much more longer. But we have today's example, which is a React application where it might be using a dangerous API function. So to give some context, this piece of code here on line 23 down to line 34 is an abstraction from the very famous Signal vulnerability that happened, where they basically took user input from text or attachments and then appended it into, arbitrary input, which led to cross-site scripting, and also because it was Electron, remote code execution. Could they see my screen before? It says participants can now see your screen. So,
yes, yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And then we have some other examples where user input might enter from content, from the function argument, which has been exported, which goes into content. We have this.props in React, which also can lead to potential user controlled input entering something malicious. And then we have some other things that should be generally okay because they're sanitized, or this is nothing, right? This is basically just an empty object being assigned and then going into copyright. And then we have hard-coded strings and other sanitized input that come from functions. So today I'm going to take you on a journey how we can go from a very basic rule, such as what currently exists today. And we're not really going, obviously there's different ways where this can be set, but we're really only going to focus on this today. So, if we run this again, all these examples are still using this type of pattern. But obviously it's not great that it's flagging everything here. And it's very good for guardrails to do this, where you want to just find all the dangerous functions, but you might not want to capture everything. You might just want to capture the content inside. So first,
just before we dive too far in, I know that our attendee here is super experienced with Semgrep, but in case viewers later on are less experienced, Lewis, would you talk just briefly about what this pattern is, about the pattern inside?
Yeah, sure. So basically we have a very simple pattern where we're saying we have a bunch of patterns. In this case, it's just one. We don't really need this right now because we just got rid of that other piece of code. So if we run this, it will still run. Basically, this is saying anything inside an element, and this is basically JSX style. So like JSX, TXX type style content, or it could be HTML. But we're basically saying anything inside an element which has dangerous to set in a HTML, like you could technically have things here too, and it still would capture. So in general, normally you could write a rule like this where you have the triple ellipses where it says anything in between, but Semgrep is able to figure out that there's dangerous to set in a HTML within inside this element. using the pattern inside. So pattern inside is anything with inside this divider. So as you can see here, we capture everything with inside this divider. If you wanted to, only capture the things with inside, this, you could use something like, well, there's two ways. There's pattern, which will show the object, but we've recently introduced, which you may have seen last time from Peter's autofix focus meta variable, which allows you to look inside the object, which is, again, value. So obviously this doesn't fix the problem that we were looking into in the first time. So let's just get rid of this for now. We'll come back to that later. The first thing that you generally do is like, how do I remove noise? And obviously the traditional way is to go and find, hey, so I know that this is some constant and I don't want to include that in my code. So you could do something like pattern not, which is basically saying, I want to make sure that
don't match this particular thing.
Pattern not doesn't match this particular thing. And you can obviously, hard code this. So basically we could just take this, because this is the great thing about Semgrep, is that you can take pieces of code and then basically like just append it into your patterns. What we're saying here is that any constant ignore. It still captures a lot of things. So like and also it doesn't capture, it will still capture this, which is basically a template literal string. Actually, no, it also is smart enough to figure out that that is the case too. So thankfully, we can just do that. I'll just leave that in for now for longevity. But then like we're not fixing these things, right? So this is the starting point of going, hey, like I want to make sure that there's no hard-coded values inside my code, but it doesn't solve the entire problem. So I'm going to move on to what I think is really important next, which is basically, so you can start off with a very basic pattern to detect a lot of things and then like remove the basic things. But the one strong power about Semgrep is that you basically can go from a very simple pattern where it captures everything to a more constrained pattern where in these examples, there's various different things which lead to vulnerabilities. This is one way where data can enter. So, sorry, I'm losing my voice today. This .props, which basically takes any of these arguments, and if these arguments enter the attachments, that's bad. The direct use of this .props.content could also be bad in a dangerous set in a HTML context, or the content that's coming in through the function method or argument. If it's entering here and entering here, then we should also probably want to flag that as well. And then the same for like general usages. So we can start by doing that by building a more conscious way of detecting this type of stuff. So for now, I'm going to change this to prop because I really care about, we're basically working with props right now in React. So this .props, this could also be a prop. This props.content could also be something. So the next thing we want to do is basically give Semgrep the context of, the where props can originate from. And basically there's a few ways to do this. And obviously we now need to start using the pattern either, because we're going to start writing a bunch of patterns. And we can start doing that pattern inside. So there is a little bit of a delay, I think, because of sharing my screen, but hopefully you can all still see this happening in real time. So the first thing I'm going to think about is making sure that, let's just go with functions. So I want to make sure that I capture this function, and I want to make sure this content value is captured. So what I can say here is that I want to capture all the functions, and then I can basically say, this is a very special, so basically, this is a very special thing with inside Semgrep. It basically, you can provide a function which basically understands all of this, anything, and then you can provide, your value. So basically, if prop enter from the function argument enters, then we basically want to do something with that. And then we also want to do things for, so normal functions, functions that may have the different syntax for arguments, which is basically the same thing. And then that will basically capture, but then we can do also, which is the smart thing, focus meta variable to only focus on the prop data. So if we run this, it's going to lose a bunch of context, right? But as you can see, a lot of this stuff is currently ignored. Not entirely sure why that one is being ignored, but we'll come back to that in a second.
And Lewis, can you explain what a focus meta variable is?
Yeah, so focus meta variable only focuses on the value. So the problem with previously using patterns in the past is that it basically captures way too much of the content. So like a pattern inside, anything could be pattern inside, like anything with inside here might match, which can be obviously problematic. So what you can do is either pattern, prop, and it will do the same thing in many ways, but focus meta variable basically focuses on the previous pattern that was captured, which gives you really great context into the content. So it's basically saying focus on this, anything from here which may enter, this value, flag it. So as you can see here, we are capturing some of that content. At the moment, I'm not entirely sure why this one isn't capturing, but we'll come back to that for now. But anyway, so that's the first way you would capture.
Yeah, it basically lets you flag a particular part of the line rather than like the whole line in this case.
Exactly. So there is a bit of a delay with the stream, which is unfortunate. So we're going to continue that. So we're also going to do, pattern inside for the other objects, because, there isn't just function props. There's also, let's just use const. You would have to write const var and let currently to basically capture all of the instances of this. But basically we can say like, hey, for this one, so for line 24, like, hey, anything with inside a deconstruction of an object, so, which is obviously, there is a bit of a, this is very sad, but it's okay. Okay, I can see it, cool. This dot props. Then we basically also want to capture that information as well. So what am I doing wrong? Oh, I know why. Sorry. So basically, at the moment, we're looking at the entire object, which needs a which basically means like anything inside this object. Okay, now this is definitely better. So the problem before was it wasn't looking inside, it wasn't capturing this. So basically, this means this is a deep expression operator. So it's like anything with inside, dangerously set in HTML that uses $prop, flag it as a potential problem. So that's the reason why this wasn't being captured before. And as you can see here as well, we've now defined, the const, but we could also do, var and let, and basically one down. There we go. Okay, so now this would capture like pretty much all the function arguments from both syntax levels. It will capture object deconstruction as well, which basically will now get us to a point where and we also need to do the final one, which is the stop props value, which may not be great for focus meta variable, but so like also this dot props dot. This may not work as intended, but we'll see. But you could build a separate pattern to capture that one as well. So, but to fix that, we could just do can either. So something like that, and then And then we could just do something like this, focus variable. I don't know if you can use this in a pattern either, but we'll see. Or yeah, you can't use it inside pattern either. Anyway, let's just assume that you would have to build a separate pattern for this. But like, let's not worry too much about it right now. Let's just move on. We can come back to this one in the future, and we'll just remove it. So, but definitely you can build a pattern for that as well. But let's not lose sleep over it right now. And actually let's keep it in. We'll fix it when we get to taint. So, okay, so now we're at the point where we're capturing a bunch of things, which is great, but it still has some things which should be okay. So let's go back to what we're talking about. So what we've done so far is we went from a very simple pattern to say like, hey, anything within inside an element which has dangerous set in HTML, which has a focus value of prop, flag it. That was obviously very bad, very noisy. It's very good for a guardrail rule, but not very great for customers that need actionable results. And then we go from, you know, things where it's just a simple constant, and then we level that up a little bit further, where we're basically saying anything within inside these prop values, flag that as well. So we're gonna now move on to taint mode. So we have the first case where we have the simple context where it's like anything. We then move on to a little step further where we say things within inside these values. Now, what we can do now is syntax. Now we can move on. What we can move on to now is basically going, let's change this to taint mode. So for taint mode, you need a few things, which is pattern sources. You need pattern, and obviously in a second, I think it's pattern sanitizers. Let's make sure I got my syntax.
Yeah.
Pattern sources, and then that's all we're going to do for now. So the best thing about this is that we can.
What about sync?
Oh, sorry. That's the tool we should have been using.
Yes.
My bad.
You use Sanitizers. That's a later feature we'll be
that's we'll be talking about that soon. So the next thing we want to do is basically like, this is what we class as like sources. So and I believe this needs to be dash patterns.
And before, well, I mean, maybe you're about to say this. Do you want to talk a little bit about
yeah. So I think it's because of sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you want to talk a little bit just about the idea of what taint mode is doing with these things.
Exactly. So before we basically were like trying to build a very large like structure of these are all the potential things that can happen. But basically, like, we've also introduced something called taint mode that allows you to do data flow analysis. So you can define your areas of interest of sources, and then you define your sinks as well. So you say, if the sources match the sinks, then, you know, that is where a vulnerability is going to occur. We obviously have sanitizers that we'll talk about in a little bit, but this is where we can add all of those examples. So what I like to do here is that we have,
and if I can just add like a little like to pile on explicitly on in terms of like data flow analysis, like this allows you to track things, modifying, building new variables or values with in different places, not just like following a specific variable or a specific property.
Correct. You know, it allows you to basically traverse through the code as well without having to build like really complex patterns, which obviously is very nice. So what we're going to do now is basically build a bunch of patterns. Dash patterns in taint mode is basically a pattern either. So you can basically have patterns if it's either this or this or this or this. And this is where we can add that previous thing we couldn't capture in the first example so easily. So I need to just do a bit of TLC here, because it's, you know, taking some previous code and trying to retrofit it into using, and I'll explain what's happened once I've fixed it all. And then this could just be a simple, cool. So what we've done now, and let's just run it, make sure I didn't break anything. I broke something. Cool, awesome. So it's probably this. Oh, come on. Okay, it's probably that. Nope. All right, I'm gonna take something I made earlier and just throw it in because I want to make sure that look how clean that looks now. Okay, so if we run that API error, taint. Oh, it's probably because this needs a patterns too. Let's just do that for now. Cool. Okay, so still not capturing this. Interesting. Oh, no, it is. That's just the wrong thing I'm looking at. So let's now, there we go. There we go. That's what we're trying to get. So, okay, so let me just explain what happened there. Obviously, I made some messing around, but basically we have some now pattern sources. Each of these have various different patterns, which might be a source. So we say it might be a function argument, which contains the focus meta variable of prop. It might be something which has been assigned from a prop value to either const var or let, which obviously has a focus meta variable, again, of prop. And then we just have a very simple pattern to look for any references to this .props.anything, because we know that props might contain user input. So we still, with taint mode, you can kind of avoid the whole like deeper expression values, because hence what Emily was talking about before. They mentioned that with data flow analysis, you're able to actually like follow the source to the sink. So in this case, we don't have to do that whole magic thing before where we had to deal with the inside this value. It just knows what to do. And then this is great because it's now removed like the constant values. It's now removed that copyright value, which obviously is fantastic, but we're still not quite there where we have sanitized input. This obviously is potentially vulnerable. This, of course, is potentially vulnerable. This is why that has the rule ID as well when we're building out these examples. This, again, would also be vulnerable. This could also be text or anything from this value. But if it was like foo, it's no longer going to flag, right? Because we're making sure that that context comes from the correct value. So this is where things get nicer. Obviously, it's not great to show the entire thing, which is why you would probably want to do somewhere here, focus meta variable on the prop, which will only flag in what's inside the danger set in HTML. Also really important to make sure that you're not showing too much, like where you only want to disclose where the vulnerability really occurs. So we've reached the point where we went from a very basic pattern into a better pattern, which had these predefined sources, which we then converted into taint mode, which then is going to allow us to really push the needle when it comes to actually writing a rule that's going to be useful to our customers, also your development teams, etc. But we're still not there completely. The final thing is we want to make sure that like common libraries like XSS, Sanitize HTML, and DOM Purify are also in the mix when it comes to making sure vulnerabilities do not occur. So that's where the pattern sanitizer comes into play. And basically the pattern sanitizer, it can be pretty much anything when it comes to like a parse int, for example. If something enters a parse int, that's probably just going to be a number and not potentially a dangerous string, for example. That could be a sanitizer. Obviously, actual sanitizers like DOM Purify could also be those things. So let's just start with something very simple. What is happening? Oh, it's because I called it sinks. There we go. And I can't spell. Sanitizers. Come on. There we go. Brain doesn't always work. So the first thing you kind of want to think about is like, again, just taking the examples from the code. Obviously, there are like 7 different ways to import stuff, which obviously you would definitely want to like build out different patterns. But the first pattern sanitizer is I want to make sure that when someone imports DOM Purify with this sanitize function, then I want to make sure that it's not flagging in my code anymore. So the way that you would do this is, again, using anything within inside the import function, and let's just call it $S for now. If anything is pattern inside from DOM Purify, you normally want to add a ... afterwards, because that's how Semgrep to look through the entire content of the page. You don't want to do that in patterns, etc., because it just adds way too much noise and causes too many lines, but you can do it in your pattern inside. hence why we have like the ... inside the function, because we want to really inspect inside that function. The same for anything inside this object. We really want to inspect inside this object, but not, you wouldn't want to do this, because that would then find too many things and you would have weird, unexpected results. Just a little FYI. So we're getting close towards where we can do this now. I think it's going to freeze and have a
question. This is a little bit of a side note. If you did that though, if you still had focus meta variable, you could probably still get the same result, right? It would just
yes,
be
you can. Just obviously for performance in general, because Semgrep is still going to go through that entire thing, right? It could eventually lead to some potential performance issues. Very unrealistic though, but generally yes, you are right. With focus meta variable, it will still only do that. However, if there is, it would prevent most.
Not recommended. Just
not recommended. So this is a very simple thing, right? Basically like the way this works, there are obviously various different ways to instantiate DOM Purify, but we're going to take the most simple example we have here. Basically, it's saying sanitize is already exposed and it's calling sanitize. So the simplest pattern we could write is basically if $S is used, then that's our sanitizer. And as you can see, we're basically saying import $S, which is this. $S is wrapped inside the value. And if the value is wrapped inside $S, then we shouldn't flag it anymore. That's fixed this issue. It hasn't obviously fixed, I don't know if we do use sanitize HTML, which again, it's basically the same pattern. So technically we wouldn't have to, for this particular instance, we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel and do everything again. So we can do like a pattern either, do with a pattern inside, and then we can, again, like this is all just, you can just take code that you would expect it to look like and then make some small modifications. And again, this would just be $S in this case. We would probably want to add the ... here, and then we'd run it. And then, as you can see, sanitize is gone. Is sanitize HTML now gone? It is. The only place where it might not find is if we have this, but this is where deep Semgrep will come into play, which is obviously not yet supporting JavaScript to this level. So eventually you could write a pattern like this, which would be able to inspect this function and then make sure that it is sanitized. And obviously with deep Semgrep, you would also be able to do it multi-file. So if you had a utility, it would be able to detect that, but it's just not there yet for JavaScript. So let's wrap up, because I know we're getting close towards time. So what happened today was we went from a very simple pattern where it was capturing a lot of things that we wouldn't want to expose to our developers. We've taken it to a place where we're choosing different pattern sources. And this could be other things too. It could be, sources that have higher accuracy, like, new URL or URL query parameters. And if that comes from user input, like the location.search, for different things, then that obviously will have a different level of accuracy compared to a function argument, for example, or a prop. So something to think about when you write your sources as well. The way I would recommend to do this is to separate your sources. So you have your props, which is this rule. And then you have a different rule that is for your, controllable use state or controllable set state, or, anything which might come from Next.js routers. These rules will be available in Semgrep soon. But if you were to think about writing rules yourself, which aren't in this context, but just for your application specifically, you probably want to separate your sources and define different levels of accuracy, because this will allow you to fine tune your rules as well. But anyway, let's go back to where we were. So we went from a very simple pattern detection with some pattern insides to reduce vulnerabilities or false positives. And we turned that into taint mode that allowed us to define various different sources, including things like just props.value. We have the object deconstruction values from this.props, and then we have anything from a function. And then finally, we defined anything with inside inner HTML. You can expand these things if you had various different instances, for example. And then you can add your own personal sanitizers that you use internally. It could be underscore It could be DOM Purify, it could be XSS, it could be sanitized HTML, it could be something that you've built proprietary. And then you can add that sanitizer into your code to, again, reduce the things further. And as you can see now, we're only flagging on rule IDs, which we would expect, versus the things which shouldn't have in the first place. So that's what I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll pass it back to Emily. And obviously, Ty, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious to see how this would look in the simple mode. I know it's like a really robust pattern, but if you can click the simple mode, I'm just kind of curious how that would look.
No. So the way simple mode works is if it becomes too complex, it basically doesn't work. So it only has like pattern inside, pattern either, and like those patterns. It's not going to work for taint mode. So
gotcha.
Yeah, unfortunately, it would be cool, but unfortunately not. Yeah.
I want to be respectful of people's time, so I know we are over, and I want to thank everyone for coming. We're happy to stick around a little bit longer if anyone has questions on anything that Lewis presented related to taint mode, reducing false positives, or just anything in general. We're here to help, and I'm sorry that we went a little long.
And I will happily share that example as well.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
I do have a question. I know that taint mode currently is limited to within the procedure or within the function only. Do you guys plan to expand it beyond one function, or make it like inter-procedural rather than intra-procedural?
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, Lewis referenced that briefly. We have this product called Deep Semgrep that is in the early stages. We have, Lewis, are some people?
Yeah, so you can access the beta, but it's not available for JavaScript right now. So I think it's available for Java. I also think it's available for Perl. No, Ruby, not Perl. It's available for, I believe, Java and Ruby initially. And obviously, I think JavaScript will be pretty close on the roadmap because it's JavaScript eats the world. So pretty sure it's going to be on the roadmaps. Once we get this going in the other realms. But obviously, we might be also releasing features, which are going to be useful for this too. So like just constant propagation could be one of those things where, ignoring things which are inside different functions, which are just strings, for example, we might be releasing those features earlier versus not, but I don't control the roadmap. So, but we are thinking internally about how we can push those things forward. But yes, it is coming. I can't tell you when, but we definitely are aware, obviously, how this is needed to really push the needle for some customers who want to make sure that their entire code is covered. So,
and I think it is worth mentioning though that Deep Semgrep is great. It will be available for when it is past beta mode. It's going to be a team tier feature. Is that correct?
I believe so currently,
yeah.
But obviously that those things can change. But at the moment it is planned to be, yeah. But if you have questions about taint mode or want us to take it for a spin, feel free to put it into the community Slack. Isaac is very happy to give anyone who wants to take Deep Semgrep for a spin. So
he's so stoked about it. So, yeah, I'm sure he would be happy to share.
To give context, Isaac's one of the co-founders of Semgrep, so he's very happy to help. And if you have ideas on what you think would be really necessary for your company to leverage Semgrep in the way that you need it to, I would love to hear those ideas too, so we can pass that internally and try and expand on what we're currently doing, or if there's something we can do internally short term to make the experience better and cover things in a little bit better way. And obviously there are hacks, and I can talk to you offline about how you can capture things from other functions too. But it's not a great user experience. It requires a lot of very knowledgeable rule writing and basically splitting apart an entire page to be able to identify those things. But we have examples that we could share with you that would work. But again, we don't expect customers to be writing that. That's why we're trying to build Deep Semgrep. So well, we're not trying, we are building Deep Semgrep. So
anything else? All right. Well, if you have any follow-up questions, or anyone watching after the fact have any questions, please post them in our community Slack. We're happy and eager to answer them about this or anything else. Thank you so much for coming and for watching, and we hope to hear from you in a future week.
thank you, appreciate it.